Well, good afternoon and welcome to the homestead. My name is Jonathan. Thank you so much for joining us for this season finale of Porch Talk. As we've done the last several years, we're going to kind of send ourselves off with a little bit of a prediction of what we see coming in the 2023-2024 years. And the purpose of that being really that so that we could know how to prepare. If you have known me for any time at all, you know that one of my callings and one of the things I just feel that is one of my duties and missions in life is to help others prepare for the challenges that come in life. And that is a spiritual, emotional, practical, financial, in really every facet of life thing that I think is very important. I think it's a very biblical concept. And I think it's one of the things in our culture that is, well, at least up until the cocoa that happened in March of 2020, I think it was something that was by and large ignored. If you were somebody who thought it was a good idea to have a little bit of food, a little bit of toilet paper, some supplies set aside more than 3 to 7 days, what you immediately would need, then that was kind of outside of the norm. Now I know that's changed a lot, and now preparedness is kind of seen a resurgence of interest, in which I think is fantastic. But there certainly is a lot more distance to go, and as we get further and further away from that particular crisis, we seem to get more and more disinterest in that as more pressing economic struggles are upon us, that becomes lesser and lesser of a priority. And so I think it's good to take some time, and as we've done in the past, and I think it's good too to kind of assess, really a lot of the validity of Porch Talk is based on the truth and the outcomes of what's discussed. And so I think it's fair to go back in time and look at last year and the year before, and just to kind of see, did we accurately assess and kind of project and put in place the right measures of preparedness for what's to come? Did we prepare in each of the ways that we discussed, spiritually, emotionally, financially, and in other ways for that time or not? By no means have we done a perfect job, but I do think we've done a decently good job and have gotten some good content and some good sound biblical principles. I know I'm not the most exciting speaker on the planet, but hopefully the content can outweigh the delivery. And so let's dive into it. First of all, let's just take a few moments and kind of absorb the reality that we're almost halfway through 2023, which is crazy. I mean, I can remember when we switched over from 1999 to 2000, just thinking, wow, I can't believe how far into the future we've come. It's the 21st century. How wild is that? And now here we are in 2023. So that is life. Life is moving fast. Lots of things happening. Great things, tragic things, challenging things, encouraging things. So let's begin to take a look at the year coming up. Let's talk socially first. Obviously, we continue to be a polarized culture here in the West, with liberalism, secularism, humanism, scientism on one side. And yes, scientism is a term. I recently watched a documentary on the religion of science, and scientism is the, I believe, correct philosophical term for that belief system. On the one hand, and then on the other hand is conservatism, libertarianism, the belief in rule of law, which of course is the republic, and that the idea that there is morality and that we should do good rather than evil, kind of on the other side. And that's definitely an overgeneralization, but really all we can talk about is generalizations when we look at this kind of a macro view of things to come. And so that is something that needs to be resolved. A divided country will not perform well, and of course we know biblically, house divided against itself cannot stand. We saw the result of that during the American Revolutionary War back in 1860 to 1865, a terrible, terrible time in United States history, which I believe probably the one thing that both groups have in common for the most part. We would not like to repeat that time in history. So in what way can we come together? In what way can the truth set us free, and those that are believing a lie, that light can be shed on those lies so that they can embrace the truth, and so that we can come together as a nation and work towards making this nation great again, which it at one time certainly was. And so that's an important goal, I think, socially. And right now, there's really two challenges to that happening. The first one, I think, is spiritual darkness, that people they don't want to hear the truth, and so they've kind of put their hands over their ears, and they've just moved forward in kind of a one-track way, and are unable to be swayed or their mind changed. And two, I think that the which I guess I'm going to stop using artificial intelligence broadly, because there are specific levels of artificial intelligence. So the simple AI, or the base AI, which is the kind of the first level, where you basically just have not real intelligence, it's just programmed intelligence or perceived intelligence, where you have algorithms in our social media, on our phones, and other electronic devices that basically tries to understand us based on our inputs. So that's when you talk to your phone, when you type and search for different things, then the algorithm is creating a personality for you, a virtual personality. And not only is it tracking where you go and what you buy, but it's tracking what you say and what you type. And then it determines how to market you, and then it sells that information to the highest bidder. And the biggest problem, besides probably the 12 things that immediately came to your mind of red flags of why that is really a terrible idea to be in a system like that, but putting all that aside, the biggest challenge is that now the news that you get, the products that are marketed to you, they don't challenge your beliefs in any way. In fact, they just go to reinforce those. So the news that you start to get through the algorithm only reinforces what you already believe. And so rather than be challenged with other points of view and other perspectives, you just get kind of the same old line of here's what you should think politically, here's what you should think spiritually, here's what you should think in the self-help world, and so on and so forth. So that is making that dichotomy and that divergence of viewpoints and of commonality even more dramatic in its difference. And so that is a problem that needs to be solved. Unfortunately, it seems like that probably will only get worse, at least for a time. And so we have to be very guarded, I think, to make sure that how we our thought process and the information that we that comes into our lives, the information that comes out of our lives through our mouth, through our typing and other methods of output, that we are not just kind of stuck in a rut with a one-track mind, and that we're just so simple-minded that we can't challenge that perhaps there are things that we believe that are false, and that there are things in our life that are untrue, that are false, and where we need to be refined and challenged and changed. And of course, the Bible says that we are to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, and so we can't renew our minds if we're not challenged with the truth. And so that is one of the dangers of that algorithmic struggle. And as that artificial intelligence becomes more and more adaptive and actually intelligent, to where it gets to a place of a little bit more self-awareness and its ability to manipulate or its ability to shift and adjust what we see and hear so that it can affect our behavior, that becomes more and more scary. And if you are still kind of living under a rock and don't believe that AI is the thing, just Google right now what's moving financial markets in the world the most. And the answer to that, you will find very quickly, is artificial intelligence. This is the age of AI. We are still in the information age, which really began back in the middle of the 20th century. It continues on, and the power of information continues to shape our lives and continues to gain power, well, no pun intended, over our lives. And I'm not anti-technology. I'm not pro-technology. I mean, I do think gadgets and stuff are cool. I do think SpaceX launch vehicles are cool. So in that sense, I guess I like technology, but I do have some very serious concerns about how really, and I guess it's not technology, it's how people are using that technology, because technology really is just kind of a tool, more or less, until AI truly becomes self-aware. Then it really is the people that are writing those programs that are using it for good or for evil, so on and so forth. But going back to the kind of that umbrella of socially as a culture, we have got to straighten out some priorities. We need to continue to be faithful to share truth, to share the gospel. Only Jesus, only God's work truly is what changes lives. And we can take political stances, we can take moral stances, we can take religious stances, but at the end of the day, it's God's truths that set us free. And I want to say, and I may come back to this a little bit later on, but kind of before, as a segue, perhaps, from talking about socially into spiritually, I've recently been listening to Rick Warren more and more, as you may or may not be aware, and I know this can get divisive really fast, so I won't focus on the divisiveness, but just kind of as a general idea. I've become more interested in the Southern Baptist decision to unfellowship, disfellowship, excommunicate, that's a Catholic word, basically break fellowship with Saddleback Church and all like 40 or 50 of its affiliates. I mean, it's really its own denomination in a sense, but they were Southern Baptist. And because they chose to elevate women to leadership role, we have decided to punish them by not having fellowship. And I guess I would say, truthfully, I'm in disagreement with that decision, regardless of how I feel particularly about what women's role in leadership should be. I think breaking fellowship over something like that is an unacceptable decision, and I'm saddened by that. But not to dwell on that, but the point being that it has caused me to become more interested in Rick Warren's preaching, and to determine for myself, is he a sound biblical teacher, and thinking more and more about the influence of the great preachers of our time. As I mentioned last week, we're mourning the loss of Dr. Charles Stanley, another great and very influential preacher and in our denomination at Southern Baptist. And so I've been thinking more and more about this, and so it's caused me to, expand that. But anyway, listening to him a little bit, one of the devotionals that's on he has a bunch of devotionals on YouVersion. Of course, he preaches Sunday. You can watch that on YouTube. All around the world, they have campuses in the Philippines and in China and in Europe and just pretty much everywhere. Just one of the most missional churches, certainly. That I don't think that part is really arguable. They have just done a fantastic job sharing the gospel all around the world. But regardless of that, one of the things that stood out to me this week that was said in one of the devotionals is that choices bring about change. And as I think back and look and reflect and diagnose my life and what has brought blessing into my life, what has brought curses and death and struggle into my life, choices most assuredly are the things that cause that. Wise choices, godly choices, moral choices bring blessing typically, and the reverse is true. Sin and arrogance and foolishness and ignorance brings curses. And it's not always that simple. Of course, it does rain on the just and the unjust, but generally you do reap what you sow. That the Bible is true. God will not be mocked. A person reaps what they sow. And so in that event, I think it's really important that we think about, when we talk about our spiritual growth, which of all these things, I really believe the most important measure of preparedness, the most important aspect, truly the foundation of preparedness, is spiritual maturity. That you must be growing with the Lord. learning, to rightly divide the word, being transformed by the renewing of your mind. Without those things, you can have the best doomsday bunker and millions of dollars in gold and silver and Bitcoin and have a fortress of supplies, and you are really naked in the sense, and unprepared in the sense that you are not preparing for what comes after this life, and you're not even prepared for the challenges that will come against you in this life. So I do truly believe, and not to cause friction with discourage anyone who's not a believer who's watching this. I hope we do have some, and I have no hostility towards you whatsoever. But I do believe that understanding who God is and placing your faith and trust in Him and having a personal relationship with Him is of paramount importance when it comes to preparedness. So let's talk economically. The big talk right now, of course, is the debt ceiling. This comes up every several years, and we have a bunch of drama and whining and nagging and complaining and over the debt ceiling. And then after all that, the same thing happens. We cave, we raise the debt ceiling, and then we add more debt, which causes more inflation and impoverishes us more and more, and makes it harder and harder for that young person who's just graduating high school or college that's looking for a job, for that job to provide a living wage. And unfortunately, as we've seen over hundreds of years of trying, minimum wage never, and you can quote me on this, minimum wage never solves that problem, because as soon as you raise minimum wage, that just causes more inflation, then everything gets more expensive, and that person who was at the bottom of the rung is always worse off. So raising minimum wage usually has the opposite effect. It makes it worse, and it impoverishes those who need a living wage more than ever. But again, getting political. This will be a highly charged porch talk today. If you're going to get offended, it'll probably be the season finale that causes you an offense. Hopefully, my heart is just to speak the truth in love, and that's what it is. So I hope you will receive it that way, even if you see things differently. And if you do, then I love the First Amendment, that is the freedom of speech, the freedom to share what you think, and I will absolutely fight for your right to do that, even if you completely feel the opposite about everything I say today. That's what is one of the things that makes our nation great, is the idea of freedom of speech. All right, so debt ceiling. So regarding the debt ceiling, some of you probably don't care. You should care. Not that you can necessarily do a lot about it. I understand probably why you're just kind of put that in a list of things outside of your control. Here's why it matters. Spending is out of control, and it's kind of like this. So let's say that you really want a yacht. I mean, who doesn't want a yacht? I mean, that would just be awesome to have a yacht. Just cruise that thing around, eat lavish food, be on the lake or on the ocean or whatever, and just, that would be cool. All right. So let's just say that today your credit was good enough that you could go out and you could buy a yacht. I mean, it's going to cost, I don't know, $500,000, $1 million, $5 million. But you borrow a ton of money, you put the minimum down, and now you can't really pay for anything else in your life, but by golly, you got this yacht, and you're driving this yacht around. Well, eventually you get to the place where, you can't make your payment on the yacht. And so, for us, basically you stop making the payments, or you can't make the payment, and you lose your yacht. Too bad, so sad. You made a bad financial choice, and your punishment is no more yacht. But the federal government has an advantage, and this is only the case in the United States of America, because it is the world reserve. The dollar is the world reserve currency. Hopefully not for that much longer, but for now it is. And that gives them the ability to fire up the printing press, and as a million YouTubers have said across the YouTube land, money printer go burr. Which is kind of the meme that basically is the idea that the government just prints as much money as it wants, so it can just keep riding around in its yacht and spending as much money as it wants to, because it can just create more out of thin air. Well, of course, you can't really create money out of thin air. It devalues all the rest of the money. That causes inflation, making everything else more expensive. And that's what happens when we raise the debt ceiling. And that's the short version of that. So the morally correct thing clearly would be to stop raising the debt ceiling, period. But how come we never do that? Well, we never do that because it's political suicide. As soon as you take away the government's credit card and say, oh, you actually have a limit now, you can't borrow more money, well, the whole system, which is based in debt, will get wrecked, and it will be a terrible transition to Bitcoin or gold or something that has real tangible value. So, will we do the morally correct thing and say no more to raising the debt ceiling? Doubtful. We will probably raise the debt ceiling. People make this ridiculous argument that, we need to pay our bills. We need to, have AAA credit. We need the faith of the world and our currency to, prevail and all this stuff. Well, if we were not stealing from everyone by printing money and causing inflation, I would agree with that. I would say, yes, that is a true statement. We need to be people of integrity and stand by our dollar. But since we're not, then at least the honest thing that we can do is let the United States go bankrupt, file for bankruptcy, say, hey, we're sorry. We obviously have no way to pay back the 30, whatever it is, $1 trillion now that we owe. So we're doing the right thing, to be honest, and saying we can't service that debt, and we're very sorry, and we're going to make changes in our government to where we are not spending as much money as we are now, so that the tax revenue that comes in covers the expenses going out, which sounds very simple and reasonable. For whatever reason, we cannot seem to do the simple and reasonable thing. But that's less important. What's more important is to understand this is what will happen. This will cause more inflation. So regardless of what the official number is, so on and so forth, groceries, gas, all the things, they're going to become more expensive. So it is more important than ever to have margin, to have savings, to have supplies. In fact, this will absolutely blow your mind. But BlackRock, the CFO, or one of the financial officers, I'm not sure if he's a CFO, but one of the financial officers did an interview last week and on Kitco News, and they were talking about he was talking about this whole idea basically that we've been discussing the last 4 or 5 minutes, and he's talking about, he's obviously a financial expert. He's talking about, money supply and all these things. And so finally the journalist that's interviewing says, well, so what can the average American do to prepare for this continued season of inflation, or possibly even hyperinflation at some point? And I about fell out of my chair when the words came out of his mouth, have 6 months of food set aside. Well, I thought to myself, oh my goodness, the voice of reason on mainstream media. I never thought I would see the day. And so here you have an extremely, a very wealthy individual with a high net worth saying, the most important thing you could probably do is have food set aside. And he's basically saying that if this, at the point, whatever point that is, it could be tomorrow, it could be, probably not 100 years. I don't think we can go that long, but it could be. I could easily see us kicking this can. Oh, we've already kicked it for so long. I'd say we could kick it another decade or two. Probably not, but maybe. And down the road, and if we do, but at some point, the come to Jesus moment is going to happen, and we're going to have to face the consequences for what we've done. And when that moment happens, you're going to see some crazy things, and it's going to be tough if you are not prepared and you don't have some things set aside. Now, what's fascinating about this, just kind of as a side note, what's fascinating about this whole idea, and I've mentioned this a couple years ago, I think, on Porch Talk or in Life Group, Preparedness Life Group. For thousands of years, humanity has always had this, I don't know if you could say it was biological, but most certainly conditioned response to winter, to where you can't really farm and grow food in terms of crops in the winter. Of course, you have livestock. still, but you have to set aside grain and vegetables and fruits and things like that so that you can have nutritional valued food throughout the winter. And people who did not do that, tribes and others who didn't do that, well, they died because they starved to death, or they got sick and from a disease, from malnutrition, and they died. So they kind of, then that attitude, that lack of preparedness killed everyone off that wasn't prepared, which left only the prepared, right? You might call that natural selection, you can call it whatever you want, but it was those who are prepared for winter, they survived. Well, really nothing has changed. We have technology now that allows us to save food and produce food better than we did back then. So now, grocery stores have that food available by and large, or at least they have for the last century or so. But in the event that the grocery store stops providing that service for you, and we found during COVID that certainly can be the case if there's enough disruption, and that was really a pretty minor disruption. I think the dollar collapsing and losing its status as a world reserve currency, or just going away completely, and us going back to the American silver dollar or a Bitcoin backed dollar or a gold backed dollar would be orders of magnitude worse than the cocoa that happened in 2020. And I'm not just saying that in a financial sense. I'm saying that in a people starving to death, not having a way to protect themselves from the anarchy that could ensue in many countries, and that's not to exclude the United States. So it would just be a calamity that probably we don't even want to discuss how bad that could be here on YouTube today. But what we can understand is that principle is still valid. And we've discussed many biblical principles and imperatives for that. So I think it's good for us to understand that you don't have to have an executive from BlackRock, which, by the way, if you're not familiar with what BlackRock is, it's the largest hedge fund in the world, billions, trillions of dollars under management, and a huge, probably the hugest, the biggest player in the financial world and in the world of commodities, period. And so something you probably should not ignore, if you have an ounce of sense, something you should consider. So I think it's good, at the very least, for us to understand that there is risk, and how do we lower our risk? By being prepared and not scared, rather than just hiding under a rock and pretending it doesn't matter or isn't the reality. We can become prepared, and that just means we have some margin. Instead of spending our whole paycheck on whatever, we spend some of that, but then we also buy some things that we might need, soap and cleaning supplies and food and some kind of putting our money in some kind of a store of value other than fiat currency that would allow us to have some buying power and have some means at a later time. It's just very, very important, especially right now in light of kind of these, we'll call them symptoms, kind of tremors, the debt ceiling debacle, the heavy inflation, and all that kind of stuff. These are just tremors, symptoms of the real problem, which is financial instability in the American empire. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the immediate time, because I'd said when we started this, we're kind of looking at the next year. Some of this probably is more than a year in advance, but I think it's good to understand the target and understand the potential for challenges. So what are some other ways, just in the immediate time, things to look at, things to prepare for? Well, one thing I think that's kind of interesting is the change in the way people educate themselves and the way people work. That obviously, again, with the cocoa in 2020, that changed a lot. You can just look at commercial real estate and you can see the vacancies, and you can see how businesses are restructuring themselves for people to work from home. And we can argue all day, whether that's good, whether that's bad. That certainly matters, but that's not for our discussion today. That's really not what we're discussing. We're just observing that is what has happened. And so I think that brings along with it kind of a new string of challenges, challenges in terms of communication and how we relate to one another socially as the metaverse and virtual reality becomes more and more a part of our lives, and we use it for work, we use it for education. I mean, the change in education has been immense. I mean, when I grew up, there was really only one way to, well, I guess there were only two ways to be educated. You either went to a public or private school, or you went somewhere where there was a teacher, an instructor in a classroom, or as an apprentice to someone, or you were educated at home by your parents while you worked on the farm or did other things, travel around the world if you're in a military family. And so those were really the only options. But later, in fact, when I started getting after I graduated from college, when I began working on my master's degree, correspondence had just become a thing. And in fact, most seminaries had not even started those programs. Only a handful of seminaries offered that. And so correspondence is kind of before the internet was a thing. I mean, I'm not that old. The internet was dawning when I went to graduate school, but it was not really, what it is today with all the all the bells and whistles. It was just very basic. And so there was still, I would get cassettes in the mail. It would have my lectures on those cassettes. I would listen to them. I would read books, actual physical paper books. I would write papers. I would communicate with my professors through letters, email, and phone calls. So it was just a very, but very different time, but yet, a pretty big change from education prior to that. And of course, now there's online education where you have virtual campuses, and you can, interact with your professors virtually through Skype or other teleconference, which I guess Skype is now less of a thing. It's more FaceTime and Facebook Live, Facebook, whatever it's, whatever platform you're on. I guess it's all kind of the same thing where you can talk to people and see them. And that was all sci-fi whenever I was growing up. That was science fiction, something you'd see on Star Trek, certainly not reality. And of course now that's just no big deal. That's our reality. So it's amazing how quickly things change, and that change is accelerating. And so I think the need for preparedness has accelerated as well, just because those changes can happen at a much more rapid pace than they have in the past. But so how we educate ourselves, how we work, you can, if you get Oculus has an amazing workspace. You put your Oculus headset on, you're immediately in your workspace. You've got your desk and multiple monitors and 360-degree views all around you. You can swivel your chair around, interact with things, send files to people, send videos to people, record things, invite people to come to your virtual space, and you can interact with them there. You can change your landscape to where instead of being in an office, you're sitting on the beach. I mean, it is absolutely, and I'm not talking sci-fi. I mean, I've played all around with this, with the Oculus software, just trying to understand what's coming, trying to understand how we're going to work in the future, where people are going to be. This week I heard, and maybe I'll think of the name of the church in a minute because I want to give them some shout out, but I've been wanting to start a Metaverse Life group and just haven't had time to get it off the ground. But there is actually a mission trip coming up, and they've invited other churches to be a part of that. But it is a mission trip to the metaverse, to where they're going to be going. And of course, the Bible says we're to go and share the gospel to all people and all nations everywhere. And they have interpreted that to also mean to the metaverse. And I think that they may be onto something, as more and more people are in virtual reality. They're going there, and they're going on mission, and they're going to be sharing the gospel in all those places and spaces. And so I mean, it's even mind-blowing for somebody like me who's a little techie, who's kind of into that and at least interested and open to that. It is mind-blowing how quickly those things are changing. And so we have a responsibility, I believe, as followers of Christ, to not be taken surprised by any of these things, but to be aware, to be awake, to be observing how we can be a light in the darkness, so that our light isn't covered up, but that it shines brightly and that we use the opportunities that are in front of us. So those things are going to continue to change how we work, how we have education, how we have fellowship. The way that it has been for thousands of years, I think those things will always continue. There's always going to be face to face. I don't think we're going to a time of this dystopian nightmare where everybody's in a spacesuit and we never have interaction face to face, and it's just people just won't do that. We kind of found out a few years ago, a lot of people, majority, I don't know, at least a chunk of people, they'd rather just kind of die than have to live like that. So I think it's unlikely, and I think even though there is a lot of oppression and tyranny and authoritarianism and all that, I think people are going to stand up and say no to that ultimately. So while yes, I'm sure that it is definitely, a 1984 style scenario in the future is possible, but I still believe that there are enough people who choose good and who choose freedom, who choose rule of law rather than majority rule. They choose the republic rather than the tyranny of democracy. They choose truth rather than a lie, that they will, with the Lord's power, prevail. And that's not to say that God doesn't always, make sure that good triumphs over evil, but ultimately it does. And I truly believe, I am not a believer in deism, so I don't think that God just started the world and started creation and he set it in motion and now we're just kind of all to ourselves to figure it out. I don't believe that. I'm not a deist. I do believe that God continues to be involved, and where there are those who confess their sins and humble themselves before the Lord and are willing to be that broken vessel for God's power to prevail, I do believe that light will shine and that there will be a measure of good, an element of good that continues on until Christ returns and calls us home and kind of changes the whole way this reality is. And the Bible tells us there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and that is ultimately what our hope is in. I do believe, I know some people, and people even in the New Testament 2,000 years ago, they thought Christ was returning imminently and that it was going to happen in their lifetime, and so they just quit their jobs and became bums and just kind of sat around and just waited for Christ to come, and he never came, and they died and he didn't come. And so nobody knows the time, and so I think by no means are we just to sit down and lay down and become disengaged, or come out here to the beautiful countryside and never see anybody or talk to anyone or engage. I do believe that we are called to go into the world, not to be of the world, but to be in the world and to be a part of it and to be interacting and working with and going to school with and going to church with others, and allowing that iron sharpens iron to occur. And when that happens, everybody wins. There can be hurt feelings, there can be hard times, and of course, if you've ever sharpened iron, I think a couple of years ago we went back to the shop and we did some practical things, talked about how to sharpen your axe for timber season and different things, sharpen scissors, knives, all those kind of things, tools that you might need to build with. We know that material is lost. That those shavings come off in order to create that nice sharp edge on the blade. And so it is hard. Being plugged in, being involved, being engaged in culture, in community. There are still a lot of Christians that think you don't have to go to church, and I don't know, they just kind of ignore that part in the Bible that says don't forsake the gathering of believers, and they just kind of doing their own little holy huddle with their families, by themselves. And while I certainly respect their right to choose to live their life the way they see fit, I do not believe that's what God intended, that he's called us together in fellowship. And so when the church says we are coming together for a meeting, I think we ought to do our best to be there. And I guess since I probably already stepped on 100 feet, I'll just keep on going. I don't think once a month come to church is ketsit. I think that is disobedience to that call. Of course, we can argue that all day long, because the Bible does not say specifically, do you meet once a day? Do you meet once a week, once a month, once a year? We all interpret that differently. But I believe it's that when if you become a part of a church, and you become a part of that life and that family, and you become that servant leader, that we agree together, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to worship, where we're going to worship, what it's going to look like. Here are the ordinances and the utility of what that looks like. And here's how we're going to take the Lord's Supper, and here's how we're going to do baptism. That I think we agree together. And so if we'd agree there to say we're going to have Sunday worship, we're going to have Wednesday night church or life groups or activities for youth and children, well, don't hate me, but I think we need to be there. Now, do I have 100% attendance at church? No. Our family takes time outs. We go on vacation. We have things that happen that prevents us. So I'm not trying to get super legalistic and hate on you if you miss church some. But but here's perhaps what we could at least compromise on, and to agree to say that it ought to be a priority. Coming together, it ought to be more important than our comfort. It ought to be more important than our free time. It ought to be more important than school sports. It ought to be more important than going to the lake. It ought to be more important than you fill in the blank. That it should be a priority, and if that means we have to say no to other things, well, that's just what that means. Or that we agree as a church together to make adjustments or allowances for those things, so that we can accomplish all those things. Because I don't believe you should forsake everything to be at church. You should forsake everything to follow Christ, but I don't know that necessarily translates unequivocally to forsake all things to be at church. But it certainly needs to be a priority, and I would say that as Christians we need to up our game a little bit more. And you might just be like, oh, well, you're a pastor, you're just making a big deal about it because church is important to you. Well, it is true. I am a pastor, and it is true church is important to me. But what I can tell you as someone who's raised 5 children into adulthood, and someone who has spent their life involved with church, that it's a blessing. That refining fire has not only been a blessing on my life, it's been a blessing in my kids' lives, and it's helped put them on a path of spiritual maturity and loving the Lord. Does that mean they're perfect? Does it mean I'm perfect? By no means. But it means that those spiritual disciplines, that seeds have been planted, and those plants are growing and becoming something useful. You don't plant a garden so that it doesn't produce anything. You don't plant a garden and you see all that nice fruits and vegetables grow up, and then you just kind of let it rot on the vine, or you let the squirrels eat it all, or whatever. No, you're growing that garden so that they'll bear fruit, and that you have vegetables and fruit to eat, right? And that's just how it is when we plug into church, and we become a part of how God's growing that spiritual fruit in our lives. Then we bear fruit. That's the point of that. And if there's a place in your church that needs to be made better or adjusted, I believe you don't just go to another church. What I believe is that you get involved and you just say, hey, how about this? Why don't we try doing it this way? And then you become involved in that, and you be willing to be a servant and help be a part of that change, not as a fire-breathing, well-intentioned dragon, but of somebody who really wants to improve and make the church better. Well, that's what improves churches, and that's what makes them better, is people caring and people getting involved and saying, this isn't just a service that's being provided to me, but this is my family, and this is I have a responsibility to the leadership, and perhaps to become a leader yourself. But to be a teacher, or to serve in children's ministry or youth ministry, or to be on mission and participate in short-term and long-term missions, and in whatever way you're involved, but to be a part of that, and to be a part of that refining fire. Because I'll be the first to say churches are not perfect, and churches don't do everything right. And I don't have a high church view that just because you put a steeple on your building and you say I'm such and such Baptist church on your sign, that just somehow makes you one with God. That churches are people and nothing more. Churches aren't buildings, they're not signs, they're not institutions. I reject all of those foolish notions, which I'm sorry for the more 100 feet that I just stepped on. But I'm really on a roll today. I'm sure the hate email is going to be flowing in, flowing in. No, hopefully not. Hopefully we'll have a libertarian approach to one another today and allow each other some freedom to share what they believe. But church is people. You have a patch of grass and you come together, 10 people, to pray and worship God. That's the church. And if you have the blessing of having a building and air conditioning and nice things and trays to take the offering on, well, that's just icing on the cake. But that's not the church. And what the church is a powerful force upon the earth. And Christ has set himself as the head of the church, and we are the bride, and we are beautiful because of what God has done and not because of what we have done and how great we are. And so I think a great church is a humble church. A great church is a church who's on mission, who loves people, who is not in love with materialism and the comfort of what the church can provide for us individually, but how we can come together as a family and make that make church better. And so I invite you to do that. I invite you to check in, plug in. Maybe you're watching this and you're kind of on the outskirts. Maybe you don't go to church anywhere and you're just kind of like, I don't like church because people are mean and judgy and smelly and whatever your objection is. Yeah, I think you're right. People are mean, smelly, judgy. Yep, I think you're right. But that's not a reason. The Bible doesn't say, well, don't forsake the gathering of believers unless they're smelly and judgy and mean and, so on and so forth. The truth is there's a lot of people that come to church and, well, they smell good and they're not mean. In fact, they're really nice. And rather than judge you, they're going to show compassion for you and your situation, and they're going to try to help you, out of love. So maybe be challenged by that. Think about that. I don't know where you're at. I really hope I haven't caused an offense. I really just want to maybe share that strong truth, but yet in love to help challenge you and encourage you. And so I think that, kind of coming full circle, talking about 23, 24, what's one of the most important things you can do to get prepared for what's coming? Plug in, be part of a community. During the Great Depression, when so many struggled and there were so many difficult challenges in the United States, it really was the churches who stood up to a large extent. And the whole soup kitchen thing and the idea of feeding people, I mean, that was the church by and large that was doing that, and Christian organizations. That was people. Bodies of Christ, the body of Christ coming together to take care of one another, and people provided shelter, they provided food, they provided the necessities of life to get through that hardship. And so if there is a hardship, and maybe your life is just a hardship right now, that you you don't need another calamity to happen in our nation. Calamity has already happened, you're already there. Well, then, come be a part of a body of believers that can stand together and help one another through that challenging time. I believe it was President Roosevelt. Was it Roosevelt? Eisenhower? I don't know. One of the great presidents said, there is nothing to fear but fear itself. Well, in a general sense, that's true. That a lot of times in the preparedness world, we're so focused on what might happen that we forget to trust God. We forget the value of realizing that at the end of the day, you can't prepare for everything, and there's not enough resources in the world for everyone to be prepared for everything. And, what are you going to do against a tsunami or a hurricane or a tornado anyway? There's limited things we can do. But trusting the Lord, being who He's called us to be, making it a priority to disciple our families and to make disciples of the people around us. Those are valuable things that you can do to prepare. And besides all the practical things of getting your house in order, One of the things that that has become increasingly audible recently is many preachers, YouTubers, those that follow Christ have begun to quote the script from the scriptures, to come out of her, my people. The idea that of Babylon and the beast. There's Revelation. There's other places in the Bible that kind of talks about this idea that if we partake in the wickedness of the world, we will face the destruction that is coming to them. I mean, that's why Lot's family had to leave Sodom and Gomorrah, is because of the destruction that was coming. And so if you are, and I want to be careful how I say this, because I'm saying this with all humility and not as some kind of a prophet or anything like that, but just to be biblically sound and to echo the voice of my brothers and sisters in the Lord who are saying this. But perhaps it is time for you to come out of her, my people, to come out of the heart of Babylon, to surround yourself. I mean, if you are surrounded by wickedness and godlessness in your life, and maybe it's your neighbors, maybe it's your work situation, maybe it is the influence in your life where you go on Friday night. I don't know what it is for you specifically, but perhaps it is time for you to depart that world. Not to become a nun, not to become a monk, not to think of yourself better than everyone else, but perhaps it is time in your life that you surround yourself with wholesomeness, with good godly people, that you maybe you're in love with that idea of owning the yacht, and you're just driving around that nice car, and you have that big house, and you have a lot of things, but you also have a lot of debt, and that you don't really own those things. You've kind of just connived and finagled them, so that you can have comfort in your life when it's not quite yet earned. And don't hear me hating on you. If you have some debt, I'm not hating on you at all. I understand. I mean, if you have $1 in your pocket, that's debt. The dollar has no value. It's just a piece of paper that says the government owes you $1. It doesn't actually do anything. So if you participate in any way with the US dollar, you are in debt. So let's just kind of get real with each other and not hate on everyone that has debt. At the same time, if you're under the yoke of debt, then perhaps it's time to just sell all those things. I mean, that's why the rich guy couldn't follow Christ, right? That's why he went away as an unbeliever. He just wasn't so in love with those things, he couldn't give them up. And that's why Jesus said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to come to God. And that's just because we have kind of sold our souls, quote unquote, and taken upon a mountain of debt so that we can have things that let us keep up with the Joneses or have comfort. And we're all guilty of that to some extent, or at least most of us. And so I'm not saying that as a judgment upon you or anyone else, but as an invitation. I'm inviting you to live a simpler life, decomplicate, get rid of the garage full or the barn full or the shed full of stuff that you don't need. And, just kind of look at the Bible and just ask yourself, like, I say that I'm a Christian. Am I really living my life, the way that Christ would have me live it? And if not, then just as Rick Warren said, choices are what make change. Choices are what brings change into our life. And so I challenge you to make those choices, bring blessing into your life, invite blessing into your life through that. If there's any way I can help you, I'm standing by to do that, and others in our River Bluff family are standing by to help you do that. I wish you a really powerful remainder of 2023 and beginning of 2024. I just pray over everyone who listens to this now or far into the future that the Lord would touch your life with blessing. He would touch your life with truth, and that there would be repentance and goodness in your life. and just wish the best for all of you. Thank you again for making Porch Talk possible, and by supporting this ministry and this work by watching. If you have not already, we would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe and click the notification bell so you can be notified of future videos. But probably signing off, or at least till the fall or next spring. And you can always reach out to me through our River Bluff social media, and you can always comment too, and I'll try to respond to those comments with a personal message or in the comment section. Hope you guys have a great rest of the week. We got rain coming, which is, it's a mixed bag. I know it brings blessing because it waters the grass, but it also can bring inconvenience. But however it comes, just remember that the potential for God to have a profound impact upon your life is always with you. And so I pray that you will let God's word permeate your life through these 10 episodes this spring, and that they will bring blessing and goodness to you. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.